Hang on. Going live on YouTube, but I need to mute it. Okay,
Good to go?
I believe so.
Okay.
There's Michael Dunn is coming in.
He's coming in now?
Yes.
All right, we'll wait for him. Okay, welcome, Michael. We're all here now, so I'm going to get started. Calling to order the Marquette City Planning Commission meeting for Tuesday, October 6, 2020. We're going to start with roll call. Commissioner Andres.
Present.
Commissioner Brooks. Commissioner Brooks.
Present.
Commissioner Larson.
Present. Here.
Commissioner Coase.
Present.
Commissioner Primo. Commissioner Primo. Wayne. Can you hear me, Wayne? Commissioner, all right. Commissioner Middlefelt. We'll get back to Wayne.
Present.
Commissioner Ruiz
Here.
and Commissioner Dunn.
Here.
Okay, we need to get a response from Wayne.
Here.
You heard me, Wayne? Okay. Sorry, maybe I didn't hear you. Okay, moving on to the agenda. Does anybody have any changes to the agenda, or can we do a vote to approve the agenda?
Aaron Andrews, motion to approve the agenda as presented.
Okay, we need a second.
Second.
Okay, Commissioner Andres with Commissioner Middlefelt for the second. All in favor? Say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any
Aye.
opposed? The motion passes. Does anybody have any comments on the minutes from this last meeting? If there are no comments on the minutes, then we can approve those by consent. And then moving on from there, does anybody have a conflict of interest? There's nothing really on the docket, so I'm guessing there isn't any conflict of interest. So with that said, we don't have any public hearings this evening. Are there any citizens wishing to address the commission on agenda items? Any intrepid people?
Is there anyone in the waiting room, Dave?
No.
Okay. We have no old business this evening. We have no new business this evening. Are there any citizens wishing to address the commission on non-agenda items? No, right? Okay. And then we have our bi-weekly report.
Are there any questions about that? Just by means of an update, something related, we have found or making a employment offer to somebody for our department for a planning zoning technician. So once they get through all the required screenings, they'll be starting to work for us, it looks like. So found a really good candidate.
Well, that's great. I hope that gives you guys some relief. Okay, if there's nothing further on that, we can move on to our work session, which we have our land development code amendments.
Okay, so you have the document in the packet, of course, and I'll share the screen here and go to that. But I'll just preface these kind of, I guess I should ask if anybody has any particular, or if you guys want to discuss any particular way to go about this other than to just, dive into it from the top. We have discussed some of these items and there's a lot here, and we're going to need to go over it with the city commission, whoever's available from this board, hopefully you can be in on that meeting on the 19th. But the way we're going to do that is basically just tell them we have a number of issues that need to be addressed in the code that you guys felt are important to amend, and ask them if they have questions about it. There's so much information here. We've discussed it numerous times already, some of these issues, and since the last time we talked, there's new items, and that's what I was kind of getting around to is, we kind of work till the clock runs out on things like this because there are issues constantly coming to our attention, almost constantly. I mean, just in the last 2 weeks, I've probably added a couple of things that came up in the last month. So I'll get to those and call those out. But with that said, is there any, particular way you'd like to go through this material?
I mean, it seems like just going through it. I mean, the bits that we've been through several times, we can hopefully get through quite quickly. But
Yeah, I'll try to just address all these items, and if I think we've addressed it, I'll ask if you want to address it again. How about that?
yeah, and so it'll pretty much be on us to really speak up if there's something that, catches our interest, but otherwise you can kind of move through it. So
Okay, I'm going to share my screen now.
really, please don't be afraid to speak up and jump in.
Go to this document. Okay, so the first, these are all, of course, ordered as we do, order things from numerically from the beginning to the back of the document, starting with the definitions. Since the last time we talked, one thing we added here is retaining wall. We did not have a definition of that. For some reason. Other than that, no changes to that section. So this is something new, and I'm sure there'll be some discussion here on the Central Business District. Okay. One of the things that the DDA, we didn't get to have that presentation by the DDA's consultants for their downtown plan, but in our conversations with the DDA and the consultant, and when I say our, I mean Joy and Dennis and I met with the consultants and the DDA executive director, and this issue of, here on this page you see highlighted the outdoor food and beverage service. During this pandemic, there's been special allowances made for outdoor food service and beverage service under the governor's executive order under the city's emergency declaration. And the Planning Commission talked about this probably no more than 2 years ago, was the last time, with the former director of the DDA, about allowing outdoor food and beverage service to be a use by right in the downtown district and on North 3rd Street. The last time it was discussed, the Planning Commission, I felt, my read of it was we're pretty close to even among the members on whether or not to say yes to both districts. That the 3rd Street corridor was a lot more of a not ready to do that than the downtown. But I felt like downtown if we had separated those out at the time, we were talking about them as in both districts. And I would like to consider this as just addressing it for the downtown. And if we do this, it kind of helps, in a way, it kind of brings some justice to the fact that in the downtown central business district, all the way from 7th Street to Front Street is this district, except for that block of Front Street, right along front, all the properties on each side of the street. But say on the west side of the street, from Ridge Street down to Fisher Street, if that is in the form-based code district, the general 5, and there is no requirement for outdoor food and beverage service in that district. So when I say it kind of brings some justice to the rest of the downtown, that's been an issue for some of the business owners down there, is that on one side of Front Street, you have to have a permit, on the other you don't. And of course you have to have a line somewhere for everything. You know, that's where the zoning district line basically falls for the form-based code. But so this is one thing that I think you guys might want to say at this point you're willing to go with as a use by right. I don't know.
Does anybody have any thoughts on this?
Are you also asking us to consider this as it pertains to 3rd Street?
No.
No?
I mean, you could, but I still think that from my read of it, the last time Planning Commission talked about it, there's still, I mean, there's so much residential integration with the commercial on 3rd Street it was pretty strong sentiment there to keep in place.
So, I mean, I guess you're right. If I can speak to this, downtown, like during summer season, I mean, it seems that pretty much everyone most restaurants already offer at least some sort of outside sidewalk seating, you know, as it is. And, you know, it looks like that most places seem to opt for that. I don't know how much more that you'd expect if we just allowed it by use. It sounds reasonable to me.
That's a good point. If I could just point out that there's sidewalk cafes are allowed as a permitted through the clerk's department option for businesses that have those chairs and tables on the sidewalk downtown. Those are permitted. They can't serve alcohol. So that's the big difference with the outdoor food and beverage service, is these businesses would be allowed to have alcohol outside. That's almost, and they can go into other areas besides the sidewalk or
does that need to be a roped in section then? If it so if this was allowed, but they wanted, so if Diggs comes to mind because they always kind of have their tables that are jutting out into the sidewalk at an interesting angle. And I mean, if you have to add a rope service to that, you know, if they have, or does this just kind of allow them to serve alcohol on the street without having anything roped off? Does that make any sense?
They would have to, the alcohol, that's a state requirement that they have a barrier to patrons. So they can't move alcohol out of the area and people can't enter it easily. So that's a state requirement, but they could do this in the back of their building. They could do it anywhere on their property. They could do it on a rooftop patio.
So Dave, my one thought is, I mean, I'm on board with this conceptually, and I'm just looking at the zoning map, and there's very little of the CBD that butts up against the medium density residential neighborhoods, but there is one section, you know, on Washington that the backside butts up against Bluff. Are we concerned about that? Although I am thinking about it, like the Bluff side is much higher, so those homes are kind of quite a bit higher. So if it sort of geographically takes care of itself and it's not an issue, I'd be fine going forward with it. I guess I just want to put out there, like, the issues that we have had on 3rd Street are, like you said, because many of the backyards butt into the residential neighborhoods. And so, it's just nice to be able to help mitigate any of those conflicts through the special land use permit. And for the most part, I don't think we'd have any. And if we didn't have any of those issues, I'd say absolutely. And so I'm just thinking about the sort of north side of Washington Street from, I guess it's 7th Street to 4th Street, where those businesses do butt up against residential.
Right. I was just looking at the standards in the Article 6 for specific uses under that section. There is no specific requirement to have like a screening fence or anything. And there are businesses downtown that have they're legal non-conforming outdoor food and beverage services as well. And, one that has been there for a long time is Flanagan's. They don't have a screening fence around their back patio. They have live music on that back patio, and I can hear it 3 or 4 blocks away, and it's always well managed. They know how to, control that within the city's nuisance ordinances. So that's the noise ordinance takes care of most of the issues. There could be nuisance issues though that would come up, and they would need to be addressed on a case-by-case basis.
Can I jump in?
Yep, Commissioner Dunn.
I'm all for outdoor food and beverage through the central business district, but also the areas along Front Street. I think we ought to make it as easy as possible. So I would like to see it as a permitted use throughout that entire thing. I would also like to see it along 3rd Street, provided there can be some sort of, I don't know if it's just a matter of enforcing the noise ordinance that's on the books already, or if there needs to be something different there. But that would be my only concern on 3rd Street, is just the noise. But even that being said, I would still lean towards allowing it as a permitted use, because I just come back to the idea that nobody's going to live within a block or 2 of Washington or 3rd Street and not expect it to be a little bit lively. If they want super quiet, non-lively neighborhood, they shouldn't move into a block away from Washington.
I have a comment, if I may.
Oh, all right, Commissioner Andres and then Commissioner Coth.
My concern is crowding on the sidewalk. It's already crowded as it is, and much less with drinking and everybody and having issues on the sidewalk. I know outdoor food and beverage I'm okay with. It's just, how do we deal with the crowding and people being under the influence of alcohol out on the sidewalk is my only concern. I'm okay with it, but that's just been my concern from the get-go.
Commissioner Coase?
Yeah, I'm for Washington, but I agree with the accessibility issue. I mean, I don't know if that's what Commissioner Andres is bringing up, but I do think that it's important that it's accessible. So that might mean that one side of the street, I mean, when you see some of those, it is pretty hard to get through. And I don't agree with 3rd Street. I think there are a lot of people that are used to kind of a quiet neighborhood on 3rd Street and may not have signed up for having a lot of drinking around the 3rd Street. So I don't agree with 3rd Street, but I definitely agree with Washington as long as it's accessible.
I was referring to mostly the accessibility of all individuals, not just people in wheelchairs, but all individuals.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, of course. All individuals. Yep.
Commissioner Larson?
I just want to clarify with Dave. So the outdoor food and beverage service, that is solely on their property. The sidewalk cafes are a different, what you were explaining. So if we allow the outdoor food and beverage service, that doesn't necessarily give them a right to that particular sidewalk, because that's governed through, like, you still have to go through the permitting process to have something on the sidewalk there. This would just allow them to do it by right on their property, or am I wrong in my understanding after you said that?
Actually, the outdoor food and beverage just deals with the private property. We have had issues with the sidewalk cafes, and there is a requirement for those when they're approved to show that they have adequate space that complies with this with the state building code portion of the ADA. So, they have to show us that. The problem is they police themselves largely. So sometimes, their customers leave a chair in the sidewalk, or, their tables get out there. I know the summer before last, the police were actually down talking to business owners because they had received several complaints. The city had received several complaints, and it's in the right of ways in that case. And so it's not a zoning issue, but this is just private property with the outdoor food and beverage.
We're talking about private property, whether it's in the front of their building or in the back of their building.
Yeah, and we have some that appear, the Ordock Brewing Company in particular, that appears it's in the sidewalk, but that's not actually on the right of way. That's still confined to their property in front of the building there.
Plus, they have the bicycle path, which allows people to use the bicycle path to get around that space.
Well, there's also
sidewalks there.
There's also stamped concrete portions of sidewalk there. There's 16 feet or so of space between their area and the curb. So that's one where it works really well. And I can't think of one of those outdoor food and beverage areas where we've seen any real conflict. The sidewalk cafes have been an issue. They don't serve alcohol. That's the big difference.
I just a question about process here. Do we need to vote on each of these or come to consensus?
Consensus would be good.
Consensus. I kind of agree with Commissioner Coase on this. I'm okay with the central business district being open, but like she mentioned, I don't think 3rd Street, I know of a couple families who, don't really want to be next to big lively bars and stuff and would not be happy to get 3rd Street opened up. So I would not support necessarily the outdoor food and beverage on 3rd, but definitely central business district seems good. Sounds like a lot of people agree with that, but I don't know if we need to vote or.
Commissioner Brooks?
Yeah, isn't Stucco's, isn't that already, how is that different from what we're talking about?
So Eric, you can still have outdoor food and beverage. You just need a special permit for it. So you have to come before this board to get approved. Your neighbors can come and complain. We can put special conditions on it. The change that we're talking about here is that you would be able to do it as of right, as opposed to a special permit. So 3rd Street, you can still do food and beverage, but it gives us the sort of ability to regulate it a little. What we're saying is in the CBD, you can just do it as of right. And if there's complaints, it would basically become, you'd have to make a complaint to the police department or something if you have an issue.
Well, that would be a zoning complaint if it's on private property. And then we could deal with those issues where we might have maybe somebody that you could resolve it by putting a screening fence there like they did with the wooden nickel. You required them for their patio they added a couple of years ago to put a screening fence there because they're next to a residence.
Personally, I like having more control, but that's just me.
Yeah, I can support this. I think the places where I'm worried about it, I think there'd be very few actual conditions where it would be. And if we do have some route to deal with any kind of conflict, I think this makes sense. So does anybody have an opposition to this change?
As I just said, I think we're better off with more control than less, but that's just me.
Commissioner Larson?
My one last, I guess, question is like, what is, if we could think of a worst case scenario that would come out of this, it would be essentially are there any situations where you have like a non-restaurant using the rest of their property as a result of this? I don't know what that means exactly. Like, can they all of a sudden have some sort of gatherings and food services and whatnot that might be behind that building that opened it up?
Like
That
the
would be a
fire
concern.
station, right?
Yeah, you can, like, all of a sudden you can convert your parking lot into an event space of sorts. Does this allow that? Because I know that there's some access, behind some of the things on 3rd Street.
Well, would sort of like, to do food and beverage, you have to get food and beverage permitting, and you have to go through the building department and health and safety. So it would be.
This really only makes sense for people that want to serve alcohol for the most part. There could be some other places that want to serve food, but yeah, they would have to get their licensing through the health department. Alcohol permits are very, there's a high bar to get a permit for alcohol sales.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask the question before we all agreed. It's just make sure, like, if those non-restaurant situations, does this allow them to use it as an event space? Does this allow that space to be used as an event space and potentially cause some issues? Again, just merely a hypothetical question of something that may be unanticipated before. In general, I'm in favor of this. Just to be clear, just think about unanticipated things.
It's a good point, and the answer is yes. I mean, most of those businesses would have the right to. I mean, I can't see if it's allowed in the zoning district, anybody wouldn't have the right to pursue that option.
Okay, is there any further comments on this issue? I think we can move on, and feel free to come, if you want to come back to something, let us know. On
the same page, down at the bottom, the maximum building height thing is something, I think it's been a while since we talked about it, and in the intervening time, again, this is an issue that the DDA has let us know their board is in favor of having a building height increase. And the consultant that they hired was pretty much in agreement that 74 is probably makes sense as the minimum number if you're going to increase this to allow for 5-story construction, new 5-story construction, again, because often you have a first floor that's 16 to 18 feet. You have a higher first story to allow for some atrium space or some higher ceilings, and then at least 12 feet for the other stories, so 4 other stories. So 48 feet for 4 stories, and then maybe 16 as a minimum for a first floor gets you to 74.
Commissioner Coase?
I remember we had talked about maybe making a concession with having it allowed to be taller if they had a storefront on the first floor or something like that, where that was fine, but there was something to either incentivize that or incentivize more housing options for middle income. I don't know. I remember some discussions on that. Is that still up for discussion, or are we just strictly talking height?
Well, we did talk about that when we met with the DDA, and I mean, the issue is that we get, I love these ideas about sort of incentivizing things that we want. It gets into sort of really doing a much more complex kind of treatment of how we define these things. And, you know, there's been definitely a reluctance to sort of go into that level of complexity in the CBD. So, you know, while I think it's I think it's intriguing and it could be helpful to sort of promote some of the issues that we're trying to address, there hasn't, I mean, I don't know if anybody else has thoughts on this. I'm just telling you from the conversations I've had with the DDA that they kind of like the simplicity of it at this point.
Right, and then what? So I would go to the same question as Commissioner Larson last. So what's worst case scenario then?
In terms of
everybody's allowed to have tall buildings. What is that? What are the repercussions? Like, what's the worst buildings we get?
I mean, the building can be whatever it's going to be, but basically, yeah, I mean, buildings can start going up to 74 feet. So you'll have a higher, I mean, but it will, I guess my feeling about this is that because, you know, it's not like you're going to have a 74-foot building and everything else is really low, you know, you've already got a certain level of density and height. And so this is an incremental height increase. And so, you know, it seems reasonable to me.
People are going to start complaining that they can't have the view they want, but that's just the nature of it. We got to go somewhere.
That was discussed with the DDA, and the thing is, the Central Business District, as we said, it ends one lot from the west side of Front Street, so it doesn't go to the waterfront. And actually, so we got a district down there on the waterfront that allows higher buildings. In that general 5, or is it the Founders 5? They just built a 79.5-foot building down there, and
I think we should revisit that one. But
Agreed.
Their next building is going to be, you're going to be getting a site plan for that pretty soon. It's not, I don't think it's going to be nearly that tall, but I don't think we're going to get any taller building, anything nearly like that again down there. But the issue is we're really not creating more view issues. There's already pretty broad streets downtown, and the views. I mean, we went through the list. We listed. There's probably at least 10 buildings in around downtown that are this height or taller already, that are in the same category or taller. So it's not, it is an incremental increase from what's allowed, but it's historically it's not 5-story buildings that are tall aren't unusual.
And another thing that was discussed at that meeting was, you know, this idea that, you know, from a planning perspective, in an area of higher density, you can protect view corridors, which is basically the views down the street, but sort of it's a bit much of an ask to sort of say that, like, you know, you'll just have this sort of clean slate of nothing obstructing your view. And so from a planning perspective, you know, we can make these choices to say, you know, we're going to protect certain view corridors, you know, down the streets towards the lake. You know, we're not going to put a big building at the end of, you know, terminating these streets, but, you know, along, you know, the infill on the other side of the streets, you know, we want to have development.
Yeah, you know, that leads into something that I've been wrestling with, and I don't know where exactly it fits in, but this seems like it's the closest thing to it. And that is, I'm always wondering why we couldn't get, for anything that needs approval, so whether it's a major site plan review or even a minor site plan review, I'm wondering if we can at some level start to require you know, like a 3D almost fly through, or at least elevation drawings from a couple of different perspectives that would give an idea of what that view corridor will look like after construction's completed. Because, you know, that Marquette one Marquette place, or I mean, I wish that could be redone. And I feel like if there was the ability to see what the view corridor was from a bunch of different angles, that might not have happened the way it happened. And I just want to try and avoid that in the future. And as far as increasing the building heights, I have no problem with it in the CBD, as long as, you know, like that area between Ridge and Bluff, the furthest east you can get, there's kind of a triangle in there that, I guess there's some tall buildings in there already too, but I think there's a potential there to cause some trouble. There's like a little section that's, yeah, it's kind of like a triangular block up there that seems like that could be an issue. But just in general, I'm looking for ways that we can get better information to see exactly what the view corridor is going to look like after construction.
I definitely agree with you. I think, you know, it would be there's been so many cases where if we could just have seen, you know, a visualization, it would have really helped. I don't know what ability we have to compel people to do that. Dave, do you think that's?
Yeah, I think it's definitely something we can find some kind of an appropriate requirement for that. I think there's communities that do require that, and I don't think that's. I think it's a good idea.
If it's helpful, I can pull up what we had for a requirement back in Colorado and see if that's something that might at least get the wheels turning, or you know, I'm sure it wouldn't be a plug and play kind of thing, but I'm sure it'll have to be modified a little bit, but it'll at least give us something to start with.
Sure. My only question on that is that a deal breaker for approving the height increase at this point and putting that in later?
I think that's a good deal breaker because it would give us that visualization. And I think it would motivate people to give us a visualization. No?
So you guys don't want to approve the 74 feet without having a visualization? Is that what?
Yeah, that's what I think. Yeah.
How would we do that? Would we?
I'm not sure. I don't have a problem with that, but my preference would be to try and do both at the same time. I mean, I don't know that I would make the height addition be contingent on providing view corridor. I want to see view corridor for any, I want it to be a regular thing where, you know, when we're doing a site plan review, we're seeing that as part of the package. And so that's my wish, is that we can have that be part of the ordinance, but also I'm okay with the height at the same time.
Commissioner Larson?
I mean, I don't think there's any harm in leaving it as is for right now, and then coming back to it. And that would allow us to have some opportunity to kind of think through some of these, you know, alternative kind of, you know, ideas where you could have a height bonus due to density or something, you know, other along those lines. I don't know that there's a big booming building downtown, you know, at this moment here, but you know, we could have this maybe a further discussion along these lines and look at some of these other communities, you know, prior to recommending this and put this in the next tranche, because this will be ongoing. So I think we'll probably have another tranche of things in another few months.
Well, the thing that I think is going to be the interesting piece that we have to really just dial in is, yeah, like what triggers this? What triggers you to have a visualization? Is it any new construction? Is it, you know, facade rehabilitation over a certain amount? Is it any building over 40 feet? You know, I think that's the calculus we kind of need to dial in, because, you know, just speaking from somebody who works with, you know, a lot of people doing small renovations, you know, you don't want to have somebody who's just doing, you know, some minor facade work or minimal exterior work have to pay the extra funds to get, you know, you're gonna get pushback about requiring that if it's something that's fairly minor. So we need to really figure out what's going to trigger having to do that.
That's a good point. That's a good point.
But I do think I'm totally on board with this. I think it would be a great thing to have, and it would it would kind of make people a bit more honest about what it is. You know, they have to really, the community can really see what they're getting before they get it. We'll have a clearer view of what's happening. I think it can only benefit the community.
Yeah, and I at a previous meeting, I did request, there was some townhouses that were going in, and we had tentatively requested, we didn't put any conditions on it, but we'd requested what the view shed would look like, because of course it was kind of coming over there, over by the highway, and it ultimately didn't get provided, but you know, we also approved it at that same meeting, because it was more of a like to have than a need to have condition.
Well, and we're not going to get it unless we require it necessarily, you know, like it's, you know, so and if we don't require it, we can't not approve something because we don't have it.
Yeah. I'd be on board in exploring this just a little bit more in depth and kicking it to the next round.
So the question is, are we going to try to do it for this round or next round? So are we thinking we want to, what do you think, Dave? Do you think it's feasible to get something done for this round, or do you think?
Well, so all these at the bottom of the page, you see all these footnotes next to these dimensions. And
Like
I'm a big believer in simplicity. And so if this is about height, a footnote saying that buildings that exceed, what is it, 60 or 70 feet must provide some kind of three-dimensional visualizations would be an easy approach. New construction that exceeds that height limit, a certain height limit, that could be an easy footnote to add. You know, and just going back to the thing with housing, you know, density bonuses, you know, we looked at density as a bonus, and that's these buildings are pretty much allowed to be built to the property line. We can't really add a bonus, floor area bonus or anything when they're already in that kind of when they're regulated like that. But and with, you know, housing, incentivizing housing, that tends not to work. We looked at cities where they're doing that, and the programs that work are, you're talking about hundreds of units of housing, or it seemed to be the ones that work. Small numbers of units really are probably not going to work, but adding that density in the area does provide the opportunity for people to include downtown residences as more of a probably more likely option. Not that they're going to be affordable, but at least it's an option probably when you have that kind of density available.
Would it make sense to tie this to the level of review rather than the height?
Okay, sorry, can you say that again, Commissioner Dunn?
Would it make sense to tie this to the level of review rather than a particular height? So like in my mind, I was thinking that if it's something that we require full site plan review, then we need to have, you know, some view corridors to look at. And you know, again,
I think that gets tricky because a lot of site plan reviews are for, you know, renovations, and if you're not changing the mass of the building, I don't know that we need to require that.
Well, aren't most of those a minor site plan review though?
We'll get to that. Actually, that's one of the things we're going to look at is some of the changes we'd like to propose with site plan review. It's at the end.
Okay.
We can skip to that if you'd like to.
Commissioner Brooks, did you have a comment? Did I miss something?
Yeah, I was saying, you know, why don't we kick it up to the 74 feet, and then any construction over 60 feet have sightline type of architectural drawings, a 3D print or something like that. I think that would, you know, make it really pretty much cut and dry. for new construction and or remodeling, if they're adding on a story onto another building, anything, 74 feet, from 60 to 74 feet would need a sightline plan.
Joy,
Yes, Commissioner
can I
Primo.
ask Dave, can I ask Dave a question?
You sure can. Go ahead.
Dave, aren't we supposed to be doing site plan review? Actually, the design is none of our business. The colors are none of our business. It's just the height.
Yeah, this isn't a form-based district, so the requirements are pretty much based on the siting of the building and the dimensional standards.
What does that mean?
Yeah, what you said, there's no, outside the form-based districts, there's no real specific requirements for materials or color or anything like that.
Yeah,
Character.
in the form-based code, you also can only go so high, and then you got to start making it into the wedding cake design, which is extremely expensive. And there's limited land downtown. And when you buy a piece of land, you have to be able to get, at least hope you're going to get a payback, which you can't if you're only allowed to, this is as high as you can go. This is what you can do. I mean, I think government starting right here is way too far into people's lives.
But we're not requesting any design. We're not requesting setbacks or anything like that. And I don't think we'd really be able to, given the way the code is written.
We're talking about loosening restrictions.
Eric's idea really resonates with me because you're starting with what we have now as the standard and saying if you're going to increase it, you provide an additional visualization.
Most of the plans come and everything's right on the plan. The height, the width, everything's on the plan. Why do you need a picture? Take the plan and fold it out into the building.
Commissioner Larson?
So I certainly understand what Wayne is saying. Is like, essentially, if they provide a 3D plan, are we able to use that to deny anything? Say that doesn't, without having additional thought into view sheds or other pieces in there. So I mean, otherwise it's just an exercise. It's an exercise in 3D modeling. At that point of time, if it doesn't actually show us, if we're not able to make a decision or kind of have that guide the decision.
What was the instance that was it a PUD was the last one that we did where we really wished we had a 3D? Was it a PUD for the townhouses? So I guess that's where we actually would have had some say in how it, being able to make them. I mean, I understand what Wayne's point because will it really have any impact on choices we make? I mean, I still would like Commissioner Brooks.
Sometimes a visualization rather than numbers on a paper is more helpful than numbers on a paper.
I agree. Commissioner Brooks?
Yeah, I guess I was getting back to the townhouses because we were wanting a sight line from like Champion Street from the highway. So when you're talking about, the 60 to 74 feet, asking for sight lines, meaning, yeah, you're going to get a 3D drawing, but what's it going to look like from the corner of 3rd and Prospect? What's it going to look like from the corner of 3rd and Crescent, So you're getting multiple views of it to see if, it's impeding sight lines for other businesses or sight lines for residential or, I'm just, throwing some things out there. But Well, that's what I'm getting back at, because it would have been nice to know what those townhouses are going into, what it's going to look like for the people from Champion Street. How high are they going to be? What's their sight line going to be? I mean, is it totally blocking out the trees? You know, so I think this is a really good thing to have from the 60 feet to the 74 feet. You know, if they're going to go ahead and commit to that, then they can give us a visualization what it's going to look like from the rest of the neighborhood.
Commissioner Coase?
Is there some kind of software that we could get or that the city could get so that we could put in just kind of basic visualizations of this kind of thing rather than require it of these people? I mean, because it seems like a lot to ask of every single person, but isn't there some kind of software? I mean, it doesn't seem that complex with the technology that's out there today.
You're right. It's not if somebody's hiring an architect to write up their plans for a whole project, it's not that much more to have a 3D visualization or a 3D fly through when they've already got all of the elevation drawings. Most of the CAD programs out there are going to be able to put that together pretty quickly. So I don't see it being a financial burden to anybody that's already planning on a bid project. Now that's big projects, you know, again, we still have to figure out, okay, where does this fit in, you know, and I'm kind of on board with Eric's suggestion too now, where I'm starting to think about this, where, you know, if it's over the existing 60 feet, that's where we have it kick in. And I think to address Wayne's point, you know, if you're standing on Champion before Marquette Place 1 or Marquette 1 Place, I always say it backwards. But before those were there, if you were standing on Champion and you're looking out at the lake and you're imagining what 60 feet or 70 feet is going to look like, most people can't do that very well. You can't, because of the distance and trying to figure out how tall it's going to look and how far away it is and things like that. It's hard to picture how much of the lakeshore it's going to block until you see a 3D visualization of it. And that's where it comes in handy, because you can look at those things and find out if you're going to be screwing over a lot of people that already have their houses on Champion.
So I guess I just want to go back to Wayne's point, because I do think it's good. I'm still in support of doing this, but I guess I just want to make sure that everybody here is clear. If we're setting the building height to 74 feet, that means that somebody can pretty much build the extent of their footprint to 74 feet and show us a picture. And if we don't like it, we can't tell them no, I don't think, right? Because it's within their right to build their building to 74 feet. So I just want to make sure, like, I think it's a great tool for us to understand what we're getting and for the community to see what buildings they're getting and for there to be full transparency, you know, when people are building buildings. But I guess I just want to make sure that we all understand that, you know, unless we're adding additional restrictions or things that I don't think we want to do, this visualization isn't necessarily going to be a tool we can use to alter people's design. Am I wrong, Dave?
The way I was picturing it, I thought we were talking about only giving the additional height over 60 feet if we approved of the visualization.
Yeah, that's what I thought too.
Well, I think that's a can of worms, because what is our criteria? It becomes, we need to have a very specific set of criteria that I think could be very subjective. I know, was that what you were imagining, Dave? I was thinking we just wanted the visualization to.
Yeah, I'd rather not have the requirement in this district. I see where it makes sense in the waterfront district a whole lot more with the view sheds, where you have view sheds that you're more concerned of protecting. And our next, I've seen some of in the pre-application conference for the next buildings that are going in down next to the One Marquette Place. They've done 3D visualizations of those, and you'll see those. So, you know, it's possible, but I think they're limiting their visualizations to the site. And I know Joy could talk about this with a whole lot more authority than me. When you're looking around a downtown with all those existing buildings at different heights and, you know, the way they're spread out, I wouldn't say it's not complex to construct something like that. it could be very costly.
No, I mean, and it certainly is not something that I would put on the city, that they've got enough to do. So yeah, it would be at the client's, their client's burden, or the applicant's burden to have to do this. I mean, they can be very, it depends on what we require. Are we requiring a photorealistic rendering? Are we requiring a sort of wire outline massing? Those are two very different things. But I guess, again, I just want to make sure that I don't know that we're all on the same page about what we're actually asking for and what kind of binding power that would have. Commissioner Coase?
I guess I just feel like I don't have a clear enough idea of what the increase in height means for the downtown, for the central business district. So I would feel like I don't want it to be increased to 74 feet just because I don't feel secure enough that, I think a lot of the attraction of Marquette is, what it looks like right now. And if there's no, I don't see a benefit for housing, I don't see a benefit for storefronts. So my question is, why approve it? So that's all.
Commissioner Larson?
I was just gonna say, height is just it's one of those things that I think gets most site or most pushback on, or can, when something comes into being. And I would still support taking a slower pace to this, leaving it at 60, allowing for us to kind of think about some of the things that we might want, to be included with that. I mean, this is changing the height. You could maybe, are there other items that you could add in there that talk about view sheds or density bonuses, or requirements of X, Y, and Z. It's easier to do it like up front with saying, hey, we'll recommend this increase if we can kind of do things as a bit of a package. I think there'd be some benefit into thinking through it in those manners.
Commissioner Brooks?
Well, from my viewpoint, 74 feet from 60 is substantial, and it's a good thing, just because it increases the floor space of the building and or possible residential. Real estate's becoming a premium in Marquette, as we all know. It's gone through the roof, and since COVID's released, it's just unbelievable how much the value of property has gone up in the city of Marquette. So I guess I'm encouraged by seeing the ability to go a little bit higher, just because it can give more business space, it can give more residential space. It's not that much, it's only 14 feet. I understand though, some people will be taken away because it is 14 feet, but I think it's a good thing for the city of Marquette. It will increase density, because quite frankly, we're running out of real estate in the area as we know it. And I can't even tell you what it's going to look like in a few years, just because how it's exploded just in the last year. So I'm all for it.
Commissioner Andres?
A couple things. Yes, we're running out of space. The only place is to go is up. However, with housing costs into the rising, you're eliminating the lower income of people that can afford to live in the city. I understand it's a trade-off, but I like to go slow on approaches that are a little more complicated, and this seems to be a little more complicated than we'd like it to be, and I think we need to take our time in making this decision.
Commissioner Ruiz?
I'm with I think Andrew and Aaron and Mike and Jessica here. I think that there's no need to make a decision right away. I think we've got a lot of things to think about. I understand the need for more space and more housing, but I'm not satisfied that increasing building heights is the solution that makes that possible. So I'd recommend tabling it until another hearing to give it more thought.
I guess if I can just go back and share my thoughts on this. I mean, the reason I think this is a very good idea is because, Marquette, I think one of the great things about Marquette is that, you can be in an area that feels like a city, and 5 minutes later you can be sort of on a trail and in the woods. And Marquette is growing. And I think, if we want to prevent sprawl and we want to prevent, to be able to protect these areas that are sort of on the outskirts of the city, for me, the key is to be able to increase density in our core. I think it's really critical and it's necessary. I also think, all the conversations we have about trying to increase the sort of transportation and get a better bus routes and get all of this intensity at our core, by adding more users to that, we can piggyback off of the infrastructure that we have and grow our city, but still maintain the character, which is, having areas, nearby that don't have the sprawl. Because if businesses and, you can't get space in the downtown, people are going to build further out. And I guess for me personally, I'd rather have those fights about, look and size on the outskirts of town and where it comes to sprawl, as opposed to in the core of our city where we already have density, we already have infrastructure. So that's my feeling on that. Commissioner Brooks?
Yeah, I agree with you 100%, Joy. Again, we want to keep people in the city for sure. We're talking about 14 feet. We're not talking about skyscrapers in the city of Marquette. We're not talking about monstrosity, Grand Amway by any means. We're talking about a potential 5-6 story building, which we already have in the city itself. So we're not talking about building these huge iconic, skyscrapers in the city of Marquette. It's not going to ruin our skyline. We're talking about 14 more feet, but that 14 feet can be hugely beneficial in keeping the density into the area that we already have the population. It's just going to increase the amount of population that's down there. And I agree. I'd hate to see the city just keep on moving out, bumping out more and more and more, because we have so many wonderful natural things to provide for people. And that's, quite frankly, the biggest draw to the city of Marquette I'm seeing right now is people love the trails. They love the lake. They do like the downtown. They do like these things. So when I'm looking at this, I don't think, we need to beat a dead horse here by any means. We're talking 14 feet. We're not talking skyscrapers. We're not talking anything that's going to stick out like a turd in a punch bowl. We're talking about something that, is potentially 14 feet higher than we previously had. So I don't see the big deal in it.
Dave?
Yeah, I'll just say this, when we say there's not a demand, that's not really accurate, because we have a developer that bought a parcel down there and wants to build a 5-story building to 70 feet. It's not being built because they can't do that. And we don't know, I'm not an advocate for them, and I don't know if they're, going to change their mind. But, again, this is something the DDA is in favor of. It's something all your professional planners are in favor of, including the consultants the DDA hired.
Our previous consultants didn't request us to do it, like that went through it previously.
We didn't really address it. I mean, we didn't take this kind of a look at it. But it's, and I just go back to historically, I mean, we've made a lot of big mistakes historically, but some of the things that were done well in Marquette were some of these historic buildings that are quite large. The only really large building and that people don't seem to like in the downtown is the Snowberry Heights building. Look at the courthouse and the Landmark Inn, the old City Hall building. Those are all in this range or higher.
What about the savings bank building on the corner of Front Washington?
Yeah, that's what I was thinking instead. I said landmark, I meant savings bank building.
Commissioner Andres?
But the landmark and savings bank they're both over 74 feet. Am I correct?
Savings bank is, the landmark's 60 plus.
Commissioner Andres?
Yeah.
I was going to say, going back to your wanting to keep density and wanting to work on transportation and some of the outlying areas and interest. I've been trying to talk about transportation for going on 5 years since I've been on this committee, so I would love to talk about transportation. I think it's something we need in the city.
Commissioner Larson?
And so I think, what I'm suggesting here, is that we revisit this, relatively soon. I mean, we seem to have a lot of these pieces coming. So it's not like we'd deny, saying that I want to deny it, outright. But it also, when we're changing heights and zoning, I think this also gives us a real opportunity to think of those ways in which we can cleverly, increase that density. Do you want to tie residential, into this? It has to have a floor of residential. Do you want to tie, other pieces to building to this height to get to what the city that we would like to have? Because I think all those things that we'd like to have, I think, are going to be less likely to come around if we just say, Leah, let's bump up the height. Let's bump up the height right now, and then we'll revisit it at a later time. I think if there's some of those things that we would like to see developing it, right now, before we put that recommendation forward, and maybe we take another month or 2 months, or maybe it's the next quarter that, we revisit, the height, and we are able to kind of consider some of those particular issues at that time. Again, I don't see us as denying recommending this. It's just mostly just what I think is just tabling it or putting it on the back burner for right now until the next tranche, so we can all kind of think about this conversation, what could come out of it. That's just my thoughts.
Commissioner Middlefelt?
I'm just, I know a lot of the stuff in the land development code, it was based on this idea of increasing density, which I generally agree is a great idea for transportation and all of that. But I wonder, Dave, or maybe Joy or others who have studied this stuff, do we know, is there empirical studies done on other cities that have demonstrated that increasing density in urban cores does actually prevent sprawl?
Oh yeah.
Is that is a thing? Because it doesn't, other than urban growth boundaries and things, it's what, I don't know, I'd be curious to read that and just look at what, I mean, I think that's an assumption that we've been working off of, but I just would like to see more, I guess, research on that, or demonstrating how increasing a building by 14 feet, is going to prevent people from wanting to develop on the outskirts. It's just an assumption that I think I've embraced that assumption, but I realized listening to this conversation that I've never actually looked into the research on that and to prove that that is in fact the case.
Well, if I could address that, Joy, just real quickly, the developers that are going to build a 5-story building in our downtown core are going to have no interest in building a 5-story building on the highway in Marquette Township. It doesn't have the same impact at all. It's not the same market for what they want. It doesn't have the centrality that they're looking for. It doesn't have those historic buildings around it that they want to be part of. So there's no replacing. The downtown core is the downtown core. You can't replicate it in Marquette Township or Chocolate Township. So housing, yes, you can move housing out to anywhere, but
that's what I'm talking about more, is housing. Is there do people want to live in a 5-story building downtown versus a home in the suburbs? I'm just curious to explore that literature a little more.
If I could suggest something here, though, we've got a lot to cover, and we've been talking about this for over half an hour. The city commission, when we do this presentation to them, like I said, we're going to ask if they have questions. Is this something you'd want to leave in there as a discussion item with the city commission? I think
it would be interesting to get their point of view on it. Sorry,
it's
Commissioner Ruiz.
like this is another one of these issues where we're kind of hung up and there's not a clear consensus. And I think it might be worth bringing that up, that there's some issues that there's not a clear consensus on. And the other thing about taking time to do more study on this, I totally agree with doing more study on anything. But I think it's a mistake to say that we can just change this in 3 or 4 months or 6 months. Every time we update this document, it's a big project. It's an expensive project, and there's no guarantee we're going to be able to. I don't foresee us being able to do this more than once a year, and there's no guarantee it's going to happen again in 1 year. So I just want to throw that out there because that's been said a couple times that maybe we can just change it 3 months from now or something, and it's not likely to happen.
Okay, I guess I'd like to propose that we at least discuss it with the city commission, just because I think they would offer an interesting perspective that comes more along, you know, we're thinking of it from planning, they're thinking of it from sort of their constituency. And I think it would be an interesting perspective to get, and, you know, maybe that'll help give us some clarity on this. Commissioner Ruiz?
I agree.
Maybe someone can clue me in, and maybe I forgot, but who's trying to build something and where right now where they're not able to get it because of not be able to do it because of the height requirement?
The lot on the corner of Main and 3rd Street, next to across from the Commons.
Oh, okay. The next to Joe's Gym.
Yeah, Veridia Group bought that. They want to build a 5-story building there, and they said they need at least 70 or 72 feet to build it to modern standards.
Nope, I remember that now. I was thinking that someone was talking further, closer to the water.
They actually went through the variance process with the BZA and were denied.
You know why? I mean, the BZA, you know, looks at this pretty thoroughly as well.
I think we have a BZA member that was at the.
Michael, would you be able to, Larson?
Yeah, I guess the short of it was that the Planning Commission had just fairly recently gone through the land development code and had hired outside consultants that had reviewed every section of the land development code, and they said this, and it had been approved by the city commission, and so it had recently just happened. And so when they came before the BZA, we said the city commission and the planning commission had just approved the land development code, and it had been reviewed by an outside consultant, you know, to that extent, and to essentially say that you know, this was recently updated, you know, the figures in it are accurate to what was desired, and because it was such a long process, and then it was denied, you know, on that basis of heights being recently reviewed.
And for the BZA to sort of grant something, you have to be requesting something that's sort of specific to your site or that your neighbors have that you don't have. And so it really, I mean, short of changing the actual height limit, there is no real reason to give it to them. They're not.
Yeah, I understand it's got to be, you know.
And we can't consider the economics of it. And essentially, it said that it's going to pencil like that without having that extra floor, it doesn't, you know, make sense for them, you know, to build that, whatever the end use was of that facility.
But now we got the DDA rolling out their own experts saying that 74 is appropriate.
Right.
Yeah.
That's why I just think we should take it slower. That's all.
Agreed.
Okay, so we can bring this up as a potential discussion point with the city commission then. I'll move on.
Well, I guess one question to that is that, you know, are we going to present a number of these things in we suggest changes, and then this would be a unclear change, if that makes sense.
We can present this, I think, as something that we're not totally agreed on, and we want to get their input, and that before this is sort of passed by us, we will have a final vote on it as a group. This particular issue is under sort of conflict, or is under debate.
No, that I think that works. I just wanted to make sure that, because there's a number of things that everybody's going to be in 100% agreement on, and other things that, we don't necessarily agree on. And just
right. And I would certainly want to isolate out the issues that are not kind of consensus, and hopefully there's not that many of them. But it does seem like, this is a big deal. This isn't nothing. So I think, it is worth the conversation, and making sure that the city commission is supportive of it. So yeah, I think that's the approach I would take.
Yeah, and actually it is a big deal because, new development where that particular parcel that we're discussing is and that's kind of a transformative potentially transformative project. So next section is on the 3rd Street corridor, and we went over changing the setback for the T5 district, which is the 2 districts on the ends, to have a 0-foot setback. I think there was 100% agreement on that. Allowing rooftop patios to be to the property line, but not over the sidewalk in the T4 and in the T5. The one thing that I would suggest we add change is the standard for outbuildings, where outbuilding is an accessory structure, to allow those on the property within anywhere behind 20 feet behind the front setback, instead of this only in the rear 40 feet of the lot. There's just such a wide variety of lot types in this corridor district, and the couple that are really prominently different are the gas station, the BP station, which has an accessory structure right in the middle of the lot, which is the canopies for the gas pumps. And across the street, you have the bank building, which has not necessarily accessory structures, but it's not anything like the lot where Tasty Freeze is, or 3rd Street Bagel. I mean, they're completely different kind of lots, but I don't really see a downside to allowing the accessory structures within 20, like basically more like a normal commercial district. Any other thoughts on that?
So I encourage everybody to sort of jump in if they have a comment. Otherwise, I think, Dave's going to kind of roll through these. So please speak up.
Looks good.
Okay, so we talked about the riparian buffer overlay changes at some length at a previous meeting, just to change that to allow for projects that would be administratively approved, instead of the way it was written was as if the only way they'll be approved is through a planning commission action, which is not necessarily the case, and we didn't pick up on that at first. With PUDs, given that given the case we just went through with the people asking to change the contract and the attorney arguing with us about whether or not that contract was should have been a major amendment, I thought we just throw in some language here to make it totally, on the face that is not a minor amendment to the PUD to suggest changes to an agreed upon contract. So that was another addition recently made.
Hey, Dave.
Yeah.
sorry to interrupt, but why did that end up in our lap anyway? It seems like any kind of contract amendments or any kind of negotiations on an agreed upon deal between the city should be the purview of the commission.
Yeah, but there is no, I couldn't really think of a way to take that out of the planning commission's review process. So it does seem to make some sense for the planning commission to review that in planning terms. Because I mean, it does make sense that, you know, development occurs within a certain time frame, and that's sort of ties into having a planning process. And
and I totally get that, and that makes sense to me. It was difficult for me on that one though, because we don't have a specific set of criteria to
Right.
either approve or deny those. So it was, I guess it was just different. It felt like a variance request, but more without much guidance.
yeah, well, hopefully this case puts that kind of thing to rest. I don't know what the outcome's going to be. The city commission's going to have that on their docket for next Monday. So they'll decide that, and hopefully their decision will kind of put this thing to rest. We won't have to deal with anything like that again. But in the next section for ADUs, no changes here beside that are different from what we talked about at the last time we discussed this, which removes the requirement for family relations for both structures. The attorney's office, I talked to the attorney, they've been kind of slammed with some other business, but I've been guaranteed that this issue is going to be addressed within the next few days. I talked to one attorney about it, and he said, you know, that that's not my area expertise, and we'll let our other attorney address that. And she's been really busy. You know, she has a lot more experience with real estate and that kind of law. And so she told me that she's kind of got her schedule clear now, and she can give me an answer on that for the chain of title kind of question. So hopefully that'll be addressed soon. If there's no other questions about the ADU changes, I'd move on, but I think those are all good changes. So in this Article 6, aside from the one thing here in the food production that I wanted to make sure I hope this doesn't end up a lengthy debate over the height of an accessory structure for a hoop house, but I wanted to check in again on this 12 or 16 feet. I think we talked about bumping it to 16 from 12. I don't really know that there's a reason to go beyond 12, but this isn't my area expertise. It just, any accessory structure, permanent accessory structure can be 16 and a half. I could see maybe some conflicts over having a 16-foot hoop house close to the lot line, but then again, any accessory structure can be 16 and a half. If there's no issues with 16, I'll just move on.
Sorry, how is that any different than a greenhouse?
It's supposed to be temporary.
Okay.
It's usually not made of glass, it's plastic. And I've been doing some research on these, and because of our snow loads in this region, they recommend the arched or Gothic style, which does make it taller. So I think a 16-foot is good because it would allow people to use structures that are sound for this region. So
We didn't say this was permanent, or we did?
it shouldn't be. It's a seasonal, it's like a way to extend your growing season. So it's
Right.
usually just plastic on some metal tubing.
Right.
Yeah, it's listed here under temporary, as a temporary structure, basically.
Okay.
The next thing that we added is section 1621 under home occupations. So we've been thinking about home occupations and home offices. Obviously, the world has changed a lot in the last year, and a lot of people are working from home. So the home office thing, it totally made sense to consider this as a use by right kind of a thing without a permit. We only had 2 permits for home offices last year, and one of the big reasons we have permits is for tax assessing purposes. So if somebody has a 500-foot office, often 500 square foot office, they're running out of their home. In the past, and I don't know how far this goes back when this was introduced to the code, but it might have been the 70s, the 80s. You know, people wouldn't typically have maybe office printers or expensive computing equipment or plotters or whatever in their homes unless they had a home office. So that actually was something our tax assessing department looks at. If you apply for a permit, you may have to pay more in taxes. Michigan has a tax on that kind of equipment. That's where a big part of the city's tax revenue comes from. It has came from in the past, but I think that's changed in the states, the way states, and Wayne could probably address that. Maybe other people can, but that's one of the reasons the hospital is such a big taxpayer, because they have such high dollar equipment that's taxable. So anyway, back to this, we wanted to change this so that you didn't have to apply as long as it meets these standards, you're in compliance with the code. So we're not proposing to change any standards other than that you could use an accessory structure only for storage for the home office, same with the home occupation, and that it has to be within the square footage, 500 square feet, which
Hey,
still,
Dave.
yes.
Just a quick, I guess I'm just curious, why couldn't you have a little like office in your she shed, whatever you want to call it? Like I'm just curious. Because I feel like it's something I'm seeing a lot now, like people making little offices in their shed.
Well, it really is a can of worms to where, you know, how we would enforce the difference between having an office in a shed versus a mortuary, you know, or something like a manufacturing shop. I mean, there are people that have a lot of woodworking equipment that are, you know, I know there's people doing stuff that are building furniture, they're building stuff that they sell in a shed, in a garage. But if you want to open that up as a legal option, that becomes a lot more difficult for us to try to enforce, because I think there are environmental laws that come into play that we, you know, I don't want to go there personally. I don't think any
I was just curious, honestly.
Wants to go there into trying to draw distinctions between legal and non-legal businesses you can have in an accessory structure. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's fine. I was just curious. I just kind of was thinking that.
So that's what we're proposing, just to make some simple changes with the home occupation thing, which is often a attorney's office, tax preparers, that kind of thing. That's still permit. That still would require a permit. In the past, though, it said no accessory structure use. That's the only thing we're suggesting to change there, is that yes, you can use an accessory structure for storage of your home office and occupation equipment, supplies. With the animal keeping, I thought we should add a phrase here, because we've been getting pushback from some of you guys, and I've heard it from other people, that you know, why do we have fees for this at all? Well, the fees are only for the structures that are related to it. And we did implement fees that are about half the cost. If you have a fence or an enclosure for these, you're only going to pay about half of what you'd pay for the fence that you, another type of fence. So I just want to call out here that this permit is only for the enclosures or structures that are required. It's not required, and it's not clear. It wasn't really clear here of what this section covered as far as the animals themselves. It covers animal care, but you know, the fact is nobody's getting permits for this stuff, except if they come in and get a permit for the structures. And very few people have. We've had people get, you know, permits for beehives, and some that have gotten permits for enclosures and for the structure. They can use an existing structure, they can use existing enclosures, but by this code, you're supposed to have a permit for those so we can regulate all the things related to those animals, not just the structures.
But people are required to, sorry to interrupt, but people are required, if they're going to have chickens, they have to have, that's part of the requirement, is they have to have the hoop house. So they do have to pay this fee, right? I mean,
that's what the code says.
That's the code says. Okay.
We can't force people to get the permits, and we know that it's a very small fraction of people that are actually getting permits for these.
Mm-hmm.
But this is a new requirement of the code. It was adopted by the city, and if we want to be able to enforce people that aren't taking good care of their animals, that aren't doing it to the standards of the ordinance, this makes sense to have a requirement that they get a permit for something related to that, and the structures are the thing that makes sense rather than the animals themselves. So the next section we wanted to add, we had a request from somebody to add to the permitted encroachments into setbacks, to add basement window wells. It was already in here as a exception for those that were required. Often a window, you know, if you're using a basement as living space, you have to have a egress window, and those are in the code as exceptions to the standards for encroachments. And the question came in as, well, you know, can I do this if it's not a required window? And it seems like if it met these standards for a bay window or a chimney, you know, that should be something that, to me, it seems like a reasonable addition to this, as long as it doesn't take up more than 1/3 the length of the building wall, just like a chimney or a bay window.
Makes sense.
Okay, if there are no more comments on that. Fences, we talked about the possibility of adding an option for people to have a 5-foot fence in their front yard. And the consensus was not unless the fence was of such kind of construction that it was basically open on the top. And so I've added in this exception. And again, this would have to be a custom built fence. So it's not going to be something a lot of people are willing to do unless they really need, I mean, they're only going to do it if they needed it. And there are a lot of people with large dogs that feel like a 4-foot fence isn't large enough to contain their dog, especially when there's a lot of snow on the ground. So I've added in this option here for a hog wire fence. This is what they're called. And this is what they look like. So the image on the right,
Can you zoom in?
I don't know. Do you have the document on your computer?
Yes, I do.
So there's different ways you can build these, but basically it's a mostly open structure. Most of the images I've seen are like the one on the left. The one on the right, we do have somebody in town that went and they want to build one like this, and they went to the BCA recently for a variance to allow it to be 5 feet high. Under the current code we have, it says the fence has to be 50% open. And so if this is a 4-foot fence in the front yard, that's going to be 50% open. It meets the technical definition. And this is probably actually preferable because there isn't a hard line on the top that would probably immediately call it out or draw your attention to it next to a 4-foot picket fence or something as, oh, that's a much higher fence or 20% higher.
Commissioner Ruiz, did you have a?
I don't necessarily agree with it, extending it any higher. I mean, I think that fence looks like it's something out of Jurassic Park. And I can see, I guess the other question I have is, I could see that's very nicely done, but I could see somebody just building a short fence and then putting chicken wire on top of it or something. Would that seems to me like that would pass muster as well. I understand the desire. I have dogs myself. But I think for aesthetic purposes and for the safety of the community, I wouldn't increase the front yard fence height at all.
Just to address that issue of chicken wire is not allowed in fences in front yard. And in this section, the draft language states that the fence would be comprised of evenly spaced, quote, hog wire, and maybe topped with a handrail. So, and that's one of the, already in the standards for wire fences, you can't have wire fences that don't have evenly spaced wire. You can have fences composed of wire or partially composed of wire now, but you can't have chicken wire as a border fence.
Commissioner Brooks?
No, I think this is a good thing. Just because, some of the homes here in Marquette don't really have much of a backyard or side yard, and they have more of a front yard. And quite frankly, for the safety of people walking by these places, as we know, 4 feet isn't much if you get a Mastiff or Great Dane and then you have snow building up or whatnot. But I think it's a good thing. Because I think it's good to have these animals safely contained in the yard, because quite frankly, some people don't have room to fence these animals in a side yard or a backyard.
Commissioner Coase?
I'm just out of ignorance. Is there any exceptions for people who are living in corner lots just because they tend to not have any private yard? I just wondered if, if there's not agreement, for example, maybe corner lots could be an exception given that they don't have any privacy.
Already have a higher fence, don't they?
What?
That's actually why we had the one come up for a variance just a couple of weeks or maybe a month ago with the BZA, that they were going higher because of a big dog and they were on a corner lot, so they didn't really have a front yard. I'm sorry, they didn't really have a backyard, and so that was the exact situation. That being said, I don't know that we need to change things from how they are, because I was kind of glad we had the chance to look at it. I mean, the one that they brought before us was designed really nicely, which was great, but I could also see somebody doing it, and to Commissioner Ruiz's point, there could be some pretty ugly ones that people try and sneak through there. And it's if we're going to go up higher than what we already have, I'd like to have some eyes on it.
Great, thanks.
And corner lots already do have if you do have a backyard, you can have a higher fence line based on being on the corner. Isn't that true, Dave?
No.
I thought the side that was on the street could have a 6-foot fence.
No, because you're still in the front yard. Not until you get in the rear yard are you allowed a 6-foot high fence and 100% closed construction.
Commissioner
Okay.
Larson?
Would your thoughts be any more relieved, Tony, if it were more like required to have a top rail? I don't know if that makes any sense. Required to have a top rail, like more similar to the fence on the left.
I think going to Mr. Primo's earlier comments about the height of buildings, I think it was his comment about the height of buildings. You don't really know it until you see it. And I think once we see how high a 4-foot fence is in people's front yards, we're going to say to ourselves, wow, we messed that one up.
5 feet, you mean?
5 feet. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I'll just chime in here. I totally agree with Commissioner Ruiz, you know, and maybe it's because I'm, you know, only 5 feet tall myself, but I just feel like we should be designing for the streetscape and not for people's pets. I think, you know, in this case, I think people, you know, should get the pet that fits their house and not the opposite way, or come up with alternative solutions. I mean, if we want to address people with corner lots, that's to me a separate issue. But I don't know, maybe this is more personal than not, but I don't think it's necessary, and I don't think it's good looking, and I think it creates a wall, even if it's open, that has a much more imposing character than a 4-foot fence. That's my 2 cents on that. So I don't know if this is one where we want to take a vote on it because there's not a consensus, or if Commissioner Andres, sorry.
I agree with Tony and Joy on this one. Personally, I think if you don't have the ability to take care of your own dog, no matter how big it is, you probably shouldn't have one, but that's just a personal opinion. Yeah, I'm with Tony and Joy on this one.
Me too.
Yeah, I just want to add one thing that, you know, these things aren't thrown in there arbitrarily. They're put in there because one of the principles we have with improving our codes is when you see a lot of variances for an issue, you try to address it. So that's trying to address something that we see commonly. 5-foot fences are an issue that come up again and again. People are going to the BZA. I don't know that, I think it's really rare that anybody's ever been turned down when they go to the BZA with one of these, but they're paying a lot to go through that process. And then there's the people that can't afford to, that don't get that opportunity. So that's why it's in here.
Commissioner Ruiz?
I appreciate having that process in place. And I understand that there may be something that is becoming overly burdensome or you know, routine, but once again, I think just 5 feet is just too tall. I think it also, you know, poses I think there's other concerns here that we haven't even brought up. I mean, there could be potentially safety concerns with having fences that high. And I think Aaron brings up a good point about, you know, do I really want a dog that requires a 5-foot fence to be in a front yard, you know, next to a sidewalk? It just seems like a bad idea.
Commissioner Coase?
Yeah, I just maybe for a future conversation would be interested if a lot of those exceptions are being given to people in corner lots, and if there was perhaps something we could just make for people in corner lots so that it's not always a problem. But I do see that as an issue for people, just people with corner lots. It's hard to have any privacy, and they pay a lot for their houses. So, and I don't live on a corner lot, so, but I do notice that, you know, walking around town, like, oh wow, these corner people don't have anything that the rest of us have. So I just put that for a future conversation.
Okay. So Dave, how do you want to deal with this? I think what our 2 options would be, we could either vote on it now as a group, or do you want to, I mean, I would be okay having the conversation with the city commission if we want to get their thoughts on it, and then we could vote on it after.
Well,
What, sorry, is that Wayne? Sorry, let me let Dave.
Yeah, a fence works both ways. You can keep a dog in or it can keep a dog out. And when you've got little children playing in the front yard because you don't really have a backyard, there's a lot of dogs.
But if you've got a dog on the street that can get over a 4-foot fence, that's the dog and the dog owner's problem.
With their dogs, and their dogs take off, they could jump that fence. I've seen kids scared to death. Right in my neighborhood.
I mean, to me, then that's a dog that, you know, shouldn't be off a leash and is a
That
menace.
seems like an owner issue,
Yeah.
not a, you know, city issue, in my opinion.
I think it comes up because we get so much snow, and even a young dog that's not that big can jump a pretty tall fence, especially aided by a couple of feet of snow. But so far, I got at least 5 that are against this, so I see just removing it at this point.
That's fine with me.
We never really agreed on the solar thing for the side yards. I'm not going to take it out of there though, unless there's a consensus to take it out, the 2.5 feet, to not encroach past the 2.5 feet like everything else you can build new into a side yard.
I think my main issue is like the argument of like it's shedding snow into somebody's yard, and that being no different than, you know, putting a new metal roof on somebody's house and treating it that is treated in the same way. And we don't regulate whether or not you can put a metal roof within that 2-foot encroachment. We don't regulate that you can put a roof in that 2-foot encroachment. So if the argument is that it's because it sheds snow, then I think we should then also put something on there with metal roofs. Metal roofs shouldn't encroach within 2.5 feet. I feel like that argument you can make on both sides of it.
I agree with Commissioner Larson. We had a long
I agree with Larson. I agree.
Okay, I want to say something. This is a 2 wrongs make a right argument. So you want us to go through a difficult process of trying to create a standard for metal roofs because of this, because you want to, in the Venn diagram of all the, like Joy said, and of all the people that are going to put solar on their roofs, you're going to have this small percentage that are going to want to encroach into that side yard to put it on every bit of their roof, rather than most people are probably only using 70 or 80% of that side of the roof. So we're gonna have a 2 wrongs make a right situation and not correct this one. You're good with that?
Eric had a question.
No. Let me speak here. I guess I'm agreeing that, you know, you're going to get snow shedding from metal roofs, and you're going to get snow shedding from solar panels. So the setback, I think, is fair, and it shouldn't be changed. If I'm reading this correctly.
So Eric, are you in support of the
length? You got metal roofs that look just like shingles, and they do not set off in one big chunk.
Sorry, Wayne, can you speak up a little bit? I couldn't hear you.
They said there's shingles out there, or metal roofs that are shingles. They're shingles. St. Michael's Church, for example, the snow does not fly off those roofs with that type of metal.
Right.
You have to get in, I don't know. You have to get into specifics. You can't regulate everything.
I say leave it in.
Really get in and know what you're talking about.
I guess I am trying to sort of define this as a very sort of small subset of people. And for me, I guess the thing that's trumping here is clarity. I think more than anything, people want clarity on what's allowed. And I guess that's what this is attempting to do, is give clarity. And if this is going to sort of prevent issues with neighbors and it's such a small subset of people, I'm hoping, you know, I would think, then I support it. I mean, I understand the sort of logical route that you're taking with it, Commissioner Larson. But I do also just think if it's going to prevent a lot of conflict and provide the clarity that people want so they can feel confident getting solar, then to me, it's not that big of a sacrifice to me. That's just my perspective on it.
And I think, you know, to the larger point is saying that I would suggest that solar be allowed anywhere on that particular roof, is what I'm suggesting. You know, if that, because we're saying that if that house was in the exact middle of that lot and you had 10 feet to that edge, you could put solar anywhere on that particular roof.
Yeah.
Now, if you're kind of up right towards that, towards the lot line, you know, you are not putting, you're not able to put solar on the entirety of that roof. And again, I think that's just really the general point is saying that, you know, we should make it easier to allow, you know, just solar to be installed anywhere on that particular roof face.
Okay, so where does everybody else stand on this? Is that Commissioner Middlefeld?
Yeah, I agree with Commissioner Larson. I feel like everything that we can do to support the transition to renewables, we should make it as easy as possible. And I agree with the physical properties of solar panels are very much like, you know, a typical metal roof. I've been researching metal roofs lately, and they're very slick and they can have huge dumping, you know, into neighbors' properties. So I 100% agree with what Commissioner Larson said. I think we should treat them like, you know, any kind of roofing material, really, and make it as easy as possible for people to put them on their roof if they choose to do so.
Okay.
I do see there's language in this that says if the solar panels are incorporated into the roof itself, that's a different thing.
But then they have to opt for that exact solar panel, thus making it more difficult to promote renewables. It makes it more complex for the buyer.
Commissioner Dunn, did you?
Yeah, I agree with Commissioner Larson. But I don't want to see anything change for metal roofs or anything like that. I guess maybe for a different reason, but I want this to be very, very simple and clear and easy to understand. And I think the easiest way to do that is to allow it on anywhere on the roof. And as long as they're following, you know, building codes, you know, why manage this? Why get in there and start saying, well, we've got our own set of rules. Let's just, if there's a roof there, they can put solar on it.
Again, I don't actually want to regulate metal roofs. It's just more
Right.
simple.
Commissioner Andres, where do you fall on this? Did we lose him?
I agree with Dave, and the two wrongs don't make a right. So I say we don't take it out. We leave it as is. That's just me.
Commissioner Ruiz, did you give us your opinion on this one?
I've got no opinion. I'm staying out of this one.
Commissioner Brooks, did you try? I forget if you said something about this one.
I just think we should make it as easy as possible for renewable resources for anyone to, you know, mount it to their roof, to the side of their house, put it in their yard. It doesn't matter to me. So I'm all about renewable resources. So.
Okay. So Dave, it seems like there's 5 that are against this.
Okay, we'll deal with the nuisances.
Okay.
That's the whole reason this came up, because we had somebody do this and they created a problem for the neighbors.
And maybe if I might add, if they look at the code first, how is it going to be an issue? The problem is that person didn't look at the code, didn't get a permit, and then they put it up, and then we're dealing with after the fact type of issue. But if they look at the code, which spells it out, I guess I don't understand why is that hard?
Well-
Just like every other structure we have in the city that we have codes and setbacks. Why is this different?
It's not.
Well, I think I mean, it will be spelled out because we won't be saying they're not allowed to. So essentially, you know, the neighbor who gets the snow shed on his lawn can complain, but they're not going to be able to compel the other neighbor to remove their solar panels.
Correct.
Right, but if they build it to the code what we're proposing, they'd be able to keep their solar panels too.
We were saying what Dave's
Put the
proposing.
Solar panels
Right.
anywhere on the house besides the roof, pretty much.
Right, but
Basically, what we're proposing is to have somewhat of a setback at that 2.5 feet to have some kind of protection.
I understand, but the majority of the commission is saying that if you can put metal panels to the edge of the roof, then you should be able to do solar panels to the edge of the roof in an effort to make doing solar as straightforward and conducive as possible. So they want to remove.
But the solar panels are going to be higher on the roof than just say having a metal roof. It's not the same thing unless your roofing material is solar panels.
But it would be the same pitch. I mean, it's really the pitch that's going to affect it, right?
Well, if you put it up at a higher height, it might be 1 to 2 feet up on top of the roof, while a metal roof will just be attached to the roofing.
My understanding, it was just a couple of inches of height that you weren't going to have.
Maybe Michael could answer this, but it does, some of them do place them higher up.
I guess it all depends on the roof style and what that pitch is going to be at. You know, if you're putting it on a flat roof, you're probably going to have it angled at, you know, in some degree. So it'll all depend on that on that pitch of that roof.
Okay. Well, so for the code that we had, it says it wasn't to be in a required setback. So now we're lessening the standards and saying at least 2.5 feet. And that's what we're proposing. But so you guys are saying that you want it to go all the way up to the lot line, or if that roof even encroaches over the lot line, you want that to be placed up to that point.
The extent of the roof, I think, is what the consensus is.
Yes, we're not encouraging it, but we're just want it to be easy to put solar panels. Isn't it the case that some people may put a solar panel up after making their house and they probably aren't consulting code and could get in trouble? That's what, I mean, a lot of people,
Well,
they
you have
add
to get
on.
a permit for a solar, right? You need a permit to put up solar. That's correct.
Right.
That's what
Right.
we're talking about.
That,
Okay.
yeah. So if they're looking at the code, how much harder is it for them to follow the code? I'm just throwing out the other argument to what you guys are saying, and I just wanted to state
That's
that.
a great argument. I don't know
I mean,
why.
ultimately, I'd like to see solar be allowed by right in a similar fashion that you're able to re-roof your house and just follow electric code for when that actually gets connected at that juncture.
Well, that language is in here. Shingles that incorporate solar panels that do not require brackets and do not protrude from the roof are not required to obtain a permit. I mean, those exist, right? Those exist, and we're trying to make accommodation for those.
Commissioner Larson, is there a different price for those as compared to the others?
Substantially different
And
price.
I don't even think they sell them in Michigan yet. We looked
No.
into that.
Yeah, so
At
it's
least
not the
last
same
year they were
thing.
not
Technology.
able to be sold in Michigan.
Okay, so we had in favor of that, allowing those to go anywhere on the roof is Larson, Middlefelt, Coase, Dunn, and Ruiz.
I'm just,
Okay, if Tony's not in on that, then we don't have a majority. We have 4 that are in favor of it.
Who are
thought-
the
Oh,
Who are the four?
Give your opinion.
Wayne, you weren't in favor of that, were you?
I am, yeah.
Okay, then we have 5. Okay, then we'll take that whole section out, or that whole reference to 2.5 foot encroachment.
Wait a minute.
Were you in favor of allowing those to encroach anywhere into the side yard, Wayne? The solar panels are having a 2.5 foot limit, 2.5 feet from the side yard limit.
No, I'm in favor of the solar panels. Maybe I just don't understand what you're proposing. I'm in favor of just leaving this the way it is, the way you've got it right here.
Well, what you're proposing is encroaching into that 5 yard side yard a maximum of 2.5 feet, as if it's any other new accessory structure, not the whole roof, if the roof exceeds the 2.5 feet from the property line. Want to have a buffer there. The whole point is to have a buffer between the side yard and the solar panels.
Yeah.
So if you're in favor of that, then we have 4 that we don't have a majority that are in favor of allowing it to the set.
So we need Tony to give an opinion. Correct.
Just so I'm, and it seemed to me like there was more. One of the reasons why I really didn't give an opinion was simply because it seemed like there was more individuals who were understanding this better than I was. Dave, just so I can wrap my head around this once more, the issue is that snow is coming off these panels into neighbors' yards, correct?
Well, people that are gonna do this are gonna, depending on the pitch of the roof, they're gonna have to remove snow from the panels as well. And they make a special rake, a foam kind of a rake to rake snow off these panels. And that's another issue that occurred to me, is the maintenance part of it. It's not just snow falling off and potentially landing in a neighbor's driveway, but it's also having some space to get out in the yard and remove snow from them proactively. And if these panels are within 2 feet or a foot of the side yard, it's going to be hard to do that without that snow going on the neighbor's property. And again, we deal with a lot of these neighbor issues where people are looking for a reason sometimes to have to call us and complain about their neighbors because they don't like them. I mean, that seems logical and fair to me. I mean, what's the counter argument to that in terms of having them being so close to your neighbor's yard? I mean, can't you just push them back a little bit and still have the same usage for them?
So in the case that I think Dave is talking about, the installation that did happen, it was determined that was the best face of the roof, to have it on. And the installer said, they started the process before the land development code was in place. And so they didn't realize what the code was going to be on this. And so as a result, they got installed, and then afterwards, the neighbor ended up complaining. Now that was the optimal pitch according to the installer and homeowner for solar on that particular roof. And the neighbor at the side yard said, that causes more snow shed into their particular driveway. And so if it's the basic argument saying here is that, well, if it's a snow shed issue, would that neighbor have still, what ground, like, does that neighbor still have the same issue if it's a metal roof and whatnot in that place? If snow shed is the complete reason as why you're not able to install on that. Well, so I think they would have to remove a full row of solar, and you wouldn't have the same solar system or same solar output as you would otherwise.
But isn't pitch different than how close it is to the lot line? Isn't that, aren't we talking about how close we are to the lot line?
Yeah.
I mean, pitches, to me, pitches, I mean, to me, I think Dave makes some sense in terms of, you know, you want to be able to have your, you don't want your, I don't think that the panel should be overhanging the roof, especially if it's going to mean that you're not going to, you may need to encroach on your neighbor's property in order to clean them.
Yeah, I don't think it's about overhanging the roof. I think it's remaining within the existing footprint of.
But you could,
So this particular,
could you
go
remain,
ahead.
could you remain within the existing footprint and still be too close for comfort?
Some people's roofs are actually over the property line, you know. Not, most are not, but there are quite a few. There's a pretty large percentage of homes that are built within that 5-foot setback where the roof, with the eaves hang over into the 1 or 2 feet from the property line. And that's the situation we're trying to address. Say, you know, if it's within 2.5 feet, that's as close as it can be, 2.5. That's what we're asking for. And that's what all the other encroachments for something new into that side yard are limited at 2.5 feet. And that was the logic of trying to keep it at 2.5, as well as the maintenance issue, because, you know, that's the whole purpose. The building code allows accessory structures to be built on the property line if they meet the fire code. But how can you maintain a building that's on the property line? And that's one of the reasons we have the 3-foot setback. It also helps reduce these kind of conflicts between neighbors of, you know, snow, rain, runoff from one property to the other, and maintenance. I mean, those are the big things. You want to have some separation.
Commissioner Brooks?
So if I'm understanding this right, we're talking about encroachments. So in this particular situation, that the roof was already encroaching on the neighbor's property, is that correct?
Yes, that's the scenario to address, I think.
Okay, so in this situation is you're talking about basically that all solar panels are not allowed to encroach on a neighboring property if the roof already does?
Right.
Oh, well, that makes sense.
Well, and within.
I guess I wasn't understanding it totally, but the fact of the matter is, I mean, yeah, I understand that, you know, you're trying to make it so that there's no more encroachments on these people's property. I guess I was understanding it that, you know, the roof wasn't already encroaching. So, yeah,
not.
So I guess it is, you know, as long as, you know, they're putting these solar panels in, that's not encroaching on the you know, within, what is it, 2.5 feet?
Within 2.5 feet is what we have written here. Yeah.
All right. So no, I guess I changed my tune. I wasn't totally understanding everything here, but yeah, I agree that if the roof is already over and encroaching, that whatever you're putting on your roof should not also encroach on the people's property. I agree. I'm sorry, I'm changing my tune. I didn't understand. I apologize.
That's okay. Commissioner Ruiz?
I was chuckling because that's good, because that means that I don't have to pick a decision, I don't think. So thank you.
You know, we're all in favor of solar being easy to put on. I don't really think this is, like Andrea said, as long as you're following the code, I don't think this is really going to impact anybody's solar projects. To leave that 2.5 feet.
I would say I would lean towards where Eric's at, and the not encroaching on your neighbor's property.
Okay. Yeah, let's move on.
Okay, under the next section in parking and loading, we just actually wanted to make some changes to add some categories here for some categories of multifamily housing where I've told you guys I've looked, got software from to give us a better idea of what real averages are for parking demand. So we're actually looking at reducing, in some cases here, the number of parking spaces required in multifamily situations. And those are written in there. I don't really, I'm not going to explain that. I mean, it's all self-evident here, but this is all based on looking at international transportation engineers software and studies, hundreds of cases in most of these instances. And I think we didn't really have, even for our fairly small town, enough categories in this for how we've been dealing with parking in multifamily situations. And this is also going to be reflected in the section on site plan review. We've added some things there to deal with different levels for multifamily, and I'll skip to that in a second. Unless anybody has questions about this, I'll move on. Okay. Before we get there, though, to the last section, we have the section on signs. And I did mention this before. We have been asked and have some reason to think this is a good idea to add for a couple of our sign categories to allow for projecting signs, which are the signs that are, we call them blade signs as well, where they stick out perpendicular from a building over, typically over the sidewalk. This code did not allow for a minimum amount, a minimum size of a sign as far as length goes. We wanted to add a minimum of 3 feet. This is all based on how far it was from the nearest property line, how long it could be. So we just wanted to add parameters there for a minimum of 3 feet and to project to a maximum of 4 feet into the right of way. So that, you know, sometimes they start on, it's over private property, like the one where the Beefaroo used to be, the Reefaroo now. They have a sign that goes from, starts on private property and goes over into the public space. No more than 4 feet into the public space. That sign ends up being something like 6 or 7 feet long altogether. But, and then for the EMCs, down in number 3 for the electronic message centers, just changing the 15 feet to 16 feet, which is dimensionally more sensible, and making an exception for the west of Lincoln Avenue General Commercial District, which is Washington Street, to allow those to be not exceed 32 square feet. Reason for that is there's a plethora of existing signs that are between that 16 and 32 already in there. Most of them are probably closer to the 32. Some are over 32. They were built when there was no standard. They're all the ones I'm talking about are legally non-conforming. So it becomes an issue in there to have a standard that's much smaller than where most of them were designed. And again, that's the only district really where those signs are allowed by right anymore. They're not allowed by right. Electronic message centers aren't allowed by right downtown or in the 3rd Street corridor district, except for some of the message like the gasoline station signs. That's a kind of a state law thing. They have to be allowed to do that. Anything on those?
I think it makes sense.
Any concerns? Okay. So we get to Article 14 for administrative review. We're adding some language to clarify we're not just talking about 1 and 2 family dwellings with these zoning compliance requirements. So basically we're adding in here that multifamily wasn't included in what we considered, see, we're what's the term? Lining through the 1 and 2 family phrase at the beginning and expanding that to say residential 1, 2, and 3 family are permitted to do these certain things listed here with a zoning compliance permit. So this is replacement of structural members to decks, porches, steps, that kind of thing. And then we get into the big deal here, the required review process for development activity. And the way this chart was laid out before was kind of random. There were things that required site plan review. They weren't all necessarily grouped like this, where you have the site plan review, full site plan review, all in one group, and then a group that deals with minor site plan review, and then the group of exemptions towards the bottom. They were kind of mixed together, and it was kind of to me, it was a bit hard to navigate. So I compiled these in a different way, so it's a little more logical in that sense. And then the changes here, that first one, I think we kind of ignore that because I think I highlighted that initially. Oh, right. You see that's in there twice. The earthwork greater than 20,000 square feet. This is something that I was going to suggest that we move from full site plan review to admin site plan review. So that's the first thing. Now, the second thing is what I was talking about before with multifamily. So there's 2 categories here. The number 1 thing, or the top thing with multifamily, is new construction of multifamily that contains 20 or more dwelling units, full site plan review. I'm suggesting that down here we change this next section to deal with new construction, additions, alterations, or improvements for multifamily that contain 5 to 20 units to be, and for all multifamily residential additions, alterations, or site improvements that are not otherwise exempt to be minor site plan review. So basically, the 20 or more full site plan review, 5 to 19, and I'm going to have to change that because it really should say 19 because we can't have 2 that say 20. Or, oh no, that first one says more than 20. Sorry.
So minor site plan review, meaning it wouldn't come before the planning commission?
Right, right. And this is a more typical standard, I think, elsewhere. We've had a standard that just said multifamily. New multifamily is full site plan review. It covered everything from 3 to 20 units. And, you know, right now we have an ad hoc housing committee that is working on, you know, they're working on research basically at this point, but they're going to make some recommendations. I've been listening into their meetings, and I think Michael Dunn and Wayne are members of that committee, but I think these things are in line with making it easier for people to develop those multifamily units that we need. And our administrative site plan review is basically exactly what you guys deal with site plan review, with the exception of having the public, having it in a public forum where the public can make comments on it.
Does anybody have any thoughts or comments on this? Is everybody okay with it?
I actually had one comment, if I can.
Commissioner Dunn?
Let me try and say this right. The section about new construction additions or alterations for any non-residential, it seems like because the end result is the same as a conversion of an existing building to a non-residential use, it seems like those should be the same to me. And I don't really care whether it's a site plan review or a minor site plan review, but I feel like they should be the same. Because if I'm reading those right, I think the end result on those is the same type of structure and same.
Are you talking about the one below then?
Yeah, so the one that says new construction additions and alterations, and then go down 1, 2, 3, 4 sections, conversion of an existing building or part thereof from a residential to a non-residential use.
So why do you think those are the same?
Because the end result is a non-residential use. You're essentially talking about the same building in the end. They're getting there differently, but.
Oh, so you're talking about the fourth one down, new construction additions or alterations of any non-residential building?
Correct.
Okay, I'm just trying to understand which ones you're talking about.
So
Yeah.
Am I correct in saying you think that the standard for this should be the same as the standard for the new construction of a non-residential building?
That's correct.
Okay.
We change.
In the second case, it's the conversion of a existing building from a residential to a non-residential use. Which could be an office, often would be an office use. But it could be a different use. It could be Black Rocks was a residential use that got converted to a non-residential use. But that has a special use permit, so that's a different thing altogether. I mean, if it didn't require a special use permit, that would be something that would fall in this category. So it would probably only be something like an office or maybe a school or a church, something like that. There's a limited set of things you can change a resident in a residential district. Of course, it could be in a non-residential district. It could be downtown and you're converting the house to a coffee shop.
Or mixed use.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Anybody else have thoughts on that?
Yeah,
I just think there may be a higher level of review for a new construction of a non-residential commercial building than this conversion type of thing. And
yeah, so you're saying the fact that it's starting as residential sort of limits what the end result can be. Does that sound right, Dave?
yeah, and
it's also that you know what you've got, because you're not, if you're working with the existing building, the building's there, it already exists.
that's more or less why I would say it's different.
Okay.
So with the new construction, obviously you want to know what you're going to get. It's not already there. We don't know what we're getting until it's reviewed. With the conversion, I mean, I'm not necessarily disagree. I'm still thinking this through.
Yeah, no, and I don't mean to. I just wanted to bring it up. Like, Dave, if you.
That's a good point.
You think it's fine? I'm leaving it in the hands of the experts. It was just something that occurred to me that I wanted to bring up, but I'm not going to fight about it either way.
Yeah. Well, and we're all experts, so that's just my thoughts on it, and we can come back to it. I'll go through and point out the other things that we wanted to address here. So going down to the next section from exempt from site plan review, we're trying to get to another tier with, is particularly with multifamily, because we have, you know, more, I think more considerations that should be made for the cost of operating and, you know, doing multifamily development, which is again something that's really needed here. To change this, or to create this tier, this is a brand new thing thrown in here for consideration, to allow for alterations, additions, renovations that are less than 10% of the size of the original, and this is commercial too, commercial or multifamily residential building footprint, or less than 500 square feet, to be exempt from site plan review altogether and to be dealt with by the zoning compliance permit. So if you have, I'll give you a good example of this. So a real life example, home on 4th Street or 5th Street near downtown. There's a rental unit. They want, the owner wanted to put a new entry roof on the back entry, porch roof with new steps and a little porch, and all of that work would right now require site plan review. Require minor site plan review for something that's probably a footprint of, you know, like 100 square feet, and probably construction cost of, you know, maybe at the max $5,000. The site plan review,
Yeah.
the cost of that is just doubled the project, the cost of the project to go through site plan review.
Dave, my only question is it's 10% of the size or less than 500 square feet? So is it whichever is smaller? 10% of the size is more than 500 square feet. Would it kick out of this?
What would your thought be on that? I think so. That would.
Yeah, I think it's just not more than 500 square feet, right? Because
if it's less than 500 square feet or less than 10%.
Whichever one's.
Well, I think yeah, we could say one or the other, or we could just leave it at.
Well, I'm just thinking of a really, really large building where 10% is like if it's a 20,000 square foot building, 10% is 2,000 square feet.
Yeah. Do you want to have a 500-foot limit? I guess would be the question to answer.
10%. So this is from commercial or multifamily. I definitely think for commercial, if it's, you know, I don't think you want to, if you have a really large commercial building, you don't want to just have it be exempt from site plan review. If it's 10% of a, you know, 20 or 30,000 square foot building. I mean, I don't know that we have that situation, but.
Well, now in the section above here that we really didn't talk about, that's above this green highlighting in the middle, the additions, alterations, and renovations are less than 20% of the size of the original commercial or multifamily footprint would require minor site plan review. So that kicks in, and I was going to suggest raising that to 2,500 from 2,000, but that's a level where this doesn't become 3,000 square feet because you have this.
I don't want to stop our progress here, but we are losing planning commission members, and
yeah, that clears it up for me, Dave. It just seemed ambiguous. I just wanted it to be clear.
Okay, we still have a quorum, and we're almost to the end.
Okay.
So
I'm fine with it, Dave.
Okay. I'll move on then to the next page. The only thing we had on here was with the topography, we had a conflict between two sections here saying, you know, on site plans you have to show. And we wanted to, at the top here, it says now that this is a different chart, but it says figure 50, irons, site plan information required is what it said. We want this to be clear that this is what's required in a site plan set that's submitted. Now we can waive some of these requirements. The zoning administrator is allowed to waive some requirements in some cases, but this is just, the only thing we're suggesting here is to change this to be consistent so that in one section, if it says a minimum of 2 contour, 2-foot intervals, then that's what we have in the next section instead of a maximum of 2 feet. So we had a confusing thing there. We're just trying to clear up. The things that follow this on housing are not here for us to deliberate on right now, but they're for you to start thinking about, because these are things I do believe the ad hoc housing committee is likely to recommend. And I want to be prepared and be proactive about these issues with taking accessory dwelling units and duplexes out of the special use standard and putting them into the permitted use standard, because that's where things seem to be headed. And we just had a case go to the BZA where they approved a duplex on a 5,000 square foot lot, which is 4,000 square feet below where we were with the zoning ordinance for the minimum lot size. So and that case was pretty much a slam dunk. If you read it, you know, I can totally understand why they did that. It's a small lot, but it was in the family for 140 years or something around there. 130 years, and had been converted back to a single family, and the owner, 3rd generation family owner, wanted to convert it back to a duplex for a parent apartment or something like that. If that's the way, you know, if the BZA is going to approve that kind of thing, it seems ridiculous. And the BZA has pretty much approved almost every duplex request, that they have to come back to the planning commission with a special land use request after that. I mean, if there's a case where the BZA's got to make a variance or, you know, make a ruling on a variance, that's fine if they don't meet the lot size standards for duplex. But having this extra level of planning commission special land use added to it, just in most cases, it's kind of seeming more and more like an unnecessary requirement. But this is something that the ad hoc housing committee is going to make a judgment on at some point, and I think that's what it's going to be. And then on the next page for the medium density residential district, same thing. I don't know in the low density residential district, I feel pretty confident that this will work in the medium density, our smaller lot subdivisions, older typically subdivisions. I don't know how well it works. I don't know if we're going to get any pushback in the larger lot subdivisions on any of that, but that's not really for us to deliberate on now, as I said. And then with the mixed use district, same thing with accessory dwelling units. Those are already, duplex is already allowed by right in those districts. So just preparing for that probably eventuality. And then finally, there are 5 lots that were inadvertently rezoned by our mass rezoning when we adopted the LDC to this civic district that are privately owned residences, and we really need to have these reverted back to a residential district. So that's in there. And I did reach out to NMU and ask their planners if they thought there were other lots in this area they might want to sell, convert back to residential, so they could potentially sell those lots for development. And I got crickets. So they're not interested in that right now. They want to keep their property. So those will have to be, when we do a public hearing, we're going to have to specifically call those properties out in the, and we're going to have to notify the landowners that we're going to do that. But this all came to our attention because one of these property owners applied for a permit for something, and we were, kind of in shock that, oh no, this isn't supposed to be a civic district. They have much different standards for the lot setbacks and stuff for that.
Okay.
When is this public hearing going to be? Or do we know?
Let's see, if I remember correctly, it would be the first meeting in November.
Okay.
For us, which means we do have to get on the stick with, it's either the first meeting in November or the second meeting in November.
Wouldn't we wait until after the city commission meeting before we put any notices out? So we would want it the second meeting in November?
The only problem with doing that, I think, is we will be unable to get it done in this calendar year, which isn't a deal breaker. It was just kind of a goal to try to do it in this calendar year, but it might make more sense, and we can talk about that more this week, I guess. I don't know if we realistically even have time to do it at the first meeting in November, now that it's already October 6th. I'm not sure. But.
Okay. Have we wrapped up this review?
And since we have, I just want to say the only thing we didn't really settle was the building height issue. So that's a pretty good thing for us to bring up with the city commission, then, that we have that one issue to go over.
Okay. And whoever can be there, whoever can join in on the Zoom from the planning commission, we want to be there, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, let me get back to.
I'm planning on coming.
Great.
So, all right, can we move on? Should we move on to commission and staff comments? Brief as they may be.
Yep.
Commissioner Larson?
No comment.
Commissioner Andres?
I'm good.
Commissioner Dunn?
Hello?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Did you call me?
Yeah, if you have any comments.
Sorry, no comments. I'm hungry.
Commissioner Ruiz?
No comments.
Commissioner Brooks?
So is that the following Monday for the comments on the building height with the city commission?
19th, yeah.
19th?
Yeah.
I think that's the date of our meeting. 19th.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, 19th is the joint meeting, and then our regular meeting's on the 20th.
Perfect. That's it.
Commissioner Primo? Wayne, do you have any comments?
No,
Okay. Dave?
No, thanks. I really appreciate everybody hanging in there through a long meeting like this.
Yeah, we got through a lot of stuff, so this is good. And I think we needed to get into it on some of these issues. And I feel like at least we've come out on the other side for some of them. Andrea, do you have anything to add?
I don't have any comments. Thank you.
Okay. Then I adjourn this meeting of the Planning Commission, and I will see you guys either on the 19th or the day after, 20th. Have a good night.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Night.